The wrapping paper crinkled beneath my fingers as I carefully folded the corners of the last present, a navy blue cashmere scarf I'd spent weeks searching for. It was December 23rd, and my apartment felt warm despite the Chicago winter howling. Outside my windows, 27 gifts lay arranged on my dining table, each one thoughtfully chosen and beautifully wrapped in coordinating silver and gold paper. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I'd spent 3 months planning this Christmas, just like I had every year since graduating college. The leather-bound journal for my sister Emma, who'd mentioned wanting to start writing. The vintage baseball cards for my brother Tyler, who collected memorabilia from the 1980s Cubs. The silk scarf for Mom, who always complained about being cold but never bought herself anything nice. Even gifts for the extended family who would gather at my parents' house in Riverside Heights tomorrow evening. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 28, I'd made a successful career as a software project manager at Digital Solutions, Inc. The company specialized in creating custom applications for healthcare systems, and I'd worked my way up from junior developer to leading a team of 12 programmers. The salary allowed me to live comfortably in a one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, drive a reliable Honda Civic, and most importantly, be generous with my family during the holidays. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year, not because of receiving gifts, but because of the joy I felt watching others open presents I'd carefully selected. I kept notes throughout the year whenever family members mentioned something they wanted or needed, creating a mental catalog that made December shopping feel like solving puzzles rather than a chore. This year felt particularly special because I'd finally saved enough to give everyone something truly meaningful. The promotion I'd received in September came with a substantial raise, and I'd been setting aside money specifically for Christmas since October. Each gift represented not just thoughtfulness, but a celebration of my professional success and my ability to provide for the people I loved. The Mitchell family Christmas Eve gathering was a tradition that stretched back to my childhood. Every year, my parents opened their colonial-style home on Maple Street to accommodate aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends for an evening of dinner, carols, and gift exchange. My mother, Linda Mitchell, would spend weeks preparing traditional dishes while my father, Robert Mitchell, would transform their living room into a winter wonderland with twinkling lights and carefully arranged presents beneath a towering Douglas fir. My siblings and I had grown up looking forward to this evening. More than Christmas morning itself, there was something magical about the way the house filled with laughter, the scent of pine needles mixing with cinnamon candles, and the anticipation that built throughout the evening until the moment when Dad would finally announce it was time for the gift exchange. As children, we'd each been responsible for drawing names from a hat to determine who would receive our carefully saved allowance money in the form of a small present. But as we'd grown into adults with our own incomes, the tradition had evolved into a more elaborate affair, where everyone brought gifts for everyone else, creating a joyful chaos of wrapping paper and excited voices. I loaded the presents into my car with the same excitement I'd felt as a child, carefully arranging them in the back seat to prevent any damage during the 20-minute drive to Riverside Heights. The neighborhood where I'd grown up was filled with families who'd lived there for decades, their houses decorated with elaborate light displays that transformed the quiet suburban streets into a Christmas wonderland. My parents' house looked exactly as I'd expected, with white lights outlining the roofline and wreaths hanging from every window. Dad's pride in holiday decorating was legendary among their neighbors, and he'd clearly outdone himself this year with a new addition of illuminated reindeer on the front lawn. Mom's car was already in the driveway, along with Tyler's pickup truck and Emma's silver sedan, suggesting I was the last to arrive despite being precisely on time. The familiar sound of voices and laughter drifted from the house as I gathered the presents from my car, balancing them carefully as I navigated the icy walkway. Through the front windows, I could see the warm glow of the living room lights and the silhouettes of family members moving around the Christmas tree. Everything looked perfect, exactly as it had every year for as long as I could remember. Mom answered the door wearing the red sweater I'd given her last Christmas, her face lighting up with the genuine smile she reserved for her children. "Sarah, honey, you made it! Come in, it's freezing out there." She helped me carry the presents inside, commenting on how beautifully they were wrapped and how excited everyone would be to see what I'd brought. The house smelled like heaven, a combination of roasted turkey, fresh bread, and the vanilla candles Mom lit every Christmas Eve. The familiar scents immediately transported me back to childhood, when Christmas Eve felt like the most magical night of the year, and our family gatherings seemed to create a bubble of warmth and love that protected us from everything outside. Dad appeared from the kitchen, wearing his traditional Christmas sweater featuring a somewhat deranged-looking Santa Claus. "There's our Sarah," he boomed, pulling me into one of his characteristic bear hugs that lifted me slightly off the ground. "How's my successful daughter doing? Still conquering the world of computer programming?" I laughed, correcting him as I had countless times before. "Project management, Dad, not programming. But yes, things are going really well. I got that promotion I mentioned, and the team I'm leading just finished a major project ahead of schedule. That's my girl," he said with obvious pride. "Always knew you'd make something of yourself. Come on, let's get you some of your mother's famous eggnog. She's been perfecting the recipe all week." The living room was exactly as I'd imagined it would be, with the tree towering in the corner surrounded by carefully arranged presents. Tyler was sprawled on the couch, already working on what appeared to be his second beer, while Emma sat cross-legged, on the floor organizing gifts into neat piles. Uncle Paul and Aunt Margaret had claimed the matching recliners, and my cousin Jessica was helping Mom in the kitchen. Everyone greeted me with the warmth I'd come to expect from our family gatherings, asking about work and commenting on how well I looked. Tyler made his usual joke about me being the fancy city girl, now that I lived in Lincoln Park, while Emma wanted to hear all about my recent promotion and the new responsibilities that came with it. I added my carefully wrapped presents to the growing pile beneath the tree, taking a moment to appreciate how beautiful everything looked. The lights reflected off the silver and gold wrapping paper, creating tiny sparkles that reminded me of snow falling outside the windows. This was exactly how Christmas was supposed to feel. Dinner was a masterpiece, as always. Mom had prepared all the traditional dishes that made our Christmas Eve special. Herb-crusted turkey, homemade stuffing, green bean casserole with those crispy onions we all loved, and her famous sweet potato soufflé that was more dessert than side dish. The dining room table could barely contain all the dishes, and we had to use the good china that only came out for special occasions. The conversation flowed easily around the table, filled with updates about work, funny stories from the past, year, and gentle teasing that spoke to the comfortable relationships we'd maintained despite living in different parts of the city. Uncle Paul regaled us with tales from his latest fishing trip, while Aunt Margaret shared gossip from her book club that had us all laughing until our sides hurt. I found myself feeling grateful for this family and these traditions that had remained constant throughout all the changes in our individual lives. Even though we'd all grown up and moved out, Christmas Eve still felt like coming home in the deepest sense of the word. The house, the food, the conversations, even the way we automatically fell into our childhood roles around this table, all of it combined to create something precious and irreplaceable. After dinner, we moved back to the living room for the part of the evening I'd been anticipating most. Dad made his traditional announcement that it was time for the gift exchange, and everyone began gathering around the tree with the excited energy of children, regardless of our actual ages. The system we'd developed over the years was beautifully chaotic. Rather than taking turns, we simply dove in, with people calling out names as they found presents addressed to specific family members. The room filled with the sounds of tearing paper, excited exclamations, and heartfelt thank yous as gifts were opened and appreciated. I watched with satisfaction as Emma unwrapped the leather journal, her face lighting up with genuine delight as she ran her fingers over the smooth cover. Tyler's reaction to the vintage baseball cards was everything I'd hoped for, and he immediately began examining each card with the careful attention of a true collector. Mom's response to the cashmere scarf was perfect, holding it against her cheek and commenting on how incredibly soft it felt. One by one, I watched family members open the gifts I'd chosen for them, each reaction validating the time and thought I'd put into making this Christmas special. The room filled with expressions of gratitude and surprise as people discovered that I'd remembered their offhand comments from months earlier and transformed them into thoughtful presents. But as the pile of wrapped gifts beneath the tree grew smaller, I began to notice something strange. Names were being called out for everyone else in the room, but never mine. Tyler had opened 3 presents. Emma had received 4. Even Jessica, who was technically an extended family, had unwrapped 2 gifts addressed to her. I sat on the couch, watching the joyful chaos around me, waiting for someone to find a present with my name on it. The pile continued to shrink as wrapping paper accumulated on the floor. And still, no one had called out Sarah or for Sarah or any variation that would indicate someone had remembered to include me in this year's gift exchange. The realization crept over me slowly, like cold water rising around someone who'd been standing in it without noticing the gradual change in temperature. Everyone else in the room had received multiple gifts. Everyone else was examining their new treasures, comparing presents, and expressing gratitude to the family members who'd thought of them. I was the only person sitting empty-handed. The conversation continued around me, filled with excitement about the gifts that had been opened and plans for how various items would be used, but I felt increasingly disconnected from the warmth and joy, as if I was watching the scene through glass rather than participating in it. When the last present had been unwrapped and distributed, Dad stood up to make his traditional closing, remarks about family and gratitude and the importance of being together during the holidays. He thanked Mom for her incredible cooking, praised everyone for the thoughtful gifts they'd given, and expressed how blessed he felt to have such a wonderful family. The room fell quiet as his speech concluded, and in that silence, the absence of any gifts for me became impossible to ignore. Everyone had presents to hold, wrapping paper to clean up, new items to examine and discuss. Everyone except me. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Well, Dad said, clapping his hands together with finality, I think that covers everyone. What a wonderful Christmas Eve this has been. The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. I sat motionless on the couch, my hands folded, in my lap, processing what had just happened. 27 gifts I'd brought. Hours of careful shopping and thoughtful selection. Weeks of anticipation for this moment, and they had forgotten I existed. The silence stretched for another moment before Tyler broke it with a laugh. Hey, wait a minute. Didn't Sarah get anything? All eyes turned toward me, and I felt heat creep up my neck as the family suddenly realized their oversight. But instead of the embarrassed apologies I might have expected, or the rush to check if perhaps some gifts had been overlooked, Dad's response was something I would remember for the rest of my life. He looked directly at me, still smiling from his speech about family and gratitude, and said with a casual laugh that seemed to echo off the walls, "Oh, we forgot you existed." The room erupted in laughter, as if Dad had made the most clever joke anyone had heard all evening. Tyler nearly spilled his beer. Emma covered her mouth as she giggled, and even Mom chuckled while shaking her head at Dad's supposed wit. Paul slapped his knee, and Aunt Margaret made some comment about Dad's sense of humor getting worse with age. But I wasn't laughing. I sat frozen on the couch, feeling as if someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. The laughter continued around me, everyone enjoying Dad's joke about forgetting I existed, completely oblivious to the fact that his words had landed like a physical blow. We forgot you existed. The phrase repeated in my mind as the conversation moved on to other topics, as if nothing significant had happened. As if the daughter who had spent months planning gifts for everyone, who had driven across the city in a snowstorm to be here, who had always been the one to remember everyone else's special occasions and important moments, was so forgettable that her complete exclusion from Christmas could be turned into a punchline. I remained on the couch for another hour, participating in conversations when directly addressed, but mostly observing the family dynamics I'd somehow never noticed before. The way Tyler's opinions were always taken seriously, even when he was clearly talking nonsense. The way Emma's latest creative projects were discussed with genuine interest and encouragement. The way Mom and Dad's attention seemed to naturally flow toward my siblings, as if they were magnets and I was invisible. When I finally announced that I needed to leave, citing an early morning and the drive back to Lincoln Park, no one seemed particularly concerned about my departure. There were casual goodbyes and thanks for the gifts I'd brought, but no one asked if I was okay or seemed to notice that I'd been unusually quiet during the latter part of the evening. I gathered my coat and purse, leaving behind the empty gift, boxes and wrapping paper that had contained all the presents I'd given to people who couldn't be bothered to remember I existed. The drive home through the snowy Chicago streets felt surreal, as if I was moving through a dream where familiar landmarks had taken on strange new meanings. Back in my apartment, I sat in the dark living room still wearing my coat, staring at the Christmas tree I'd decorated with such care just a week earlier. The lights twinkled cheerfully, but they felt like decorations in someone else's home, part of a life that no longer made sense to me. "We forgot you existed." The words played on repeat in my mind as I finally understood that this wasn't an oversight or a mistake. This was a pattern I'd been too close to see, too invested in our family mythology to recognize. I'd been so focused on being the thoughtful daughter, the successful sister, the generous family member who remembered everyone's birthdays and brought beautiful gifts to every gathering, that I'd never stopped to examine whether any of that care and attention was being reciprocated. As I sat in the darkness of my apartment, still processing the events of the evening, I made a decision that would change everything. If my family could forget I existed, then perhaps it was time for me to remind them exactly what they'd been taking for granted all these years. But I wouldn't be reacting with tears or confrontation or dramatic scenes that they could dismiss as emotional overreaction. I would be strategic, patient, and methodical, just like I was in my professional life when faced with complex problems that required careful planning and flawless execution. Tomorrow was Christmas Day, and then would come New Year's, followed by all the family occasions throughout the coming year, where my absence would either be noticed or prove once and for all where I truly stood in the Mitchell family hierarchy. Either way, I would finally have my answer, and my family would learn that some people, once forgotten, have very long memories indeed. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold, matching the hollow feeling that had settled in my chest like ice that wouldn't melt. I woke up on my couch still wearing yesterday's clothes, my neck stiff from sleeping at an awkward angle. The Christmas tree lights were still twinkling, their cheerful glow now seeming almost mocking in the pale winter sunlight filtering through my apartment windows. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, all from my family. For a brief moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe they'd realized their mistake. Maybe someone had found overlooked gifts or remembered conversations about presents they'd meant to buy me. Maybe Dad's cruel joke had given way to guilt and genuine apologies. But as I scrolled through the messages, reality set in with crushing clarity. Not a single text contained an apology or acknowledgement of what had happened. Instead, they were complaints and demands disguised as casual family communication. Tyler: "Hey, can you swing by later? Need help setting up that new gaming system? You got me. The instructions don't make sense. Emma." Sarah: "OMG, this journal is perfect, but I can't find the matching pen set anywhere. Did you get one separately? Also, Mom wants to know if you can bring dessert to dinner tomorrow since you didn't contribute much to last night. Mom: Honey, Could you pick up batteries for your father's new flashlight? We're having dinner at 3 tomorrow. Don't be late. Also, Emma needs help with her resume. You're so good with that professional stuff. Dad. Sarah, that pocket knife you got me is great quality. Can you find out where you bought it? Want to get a few more for the guys at work? Each message revealed the same pattern. Gratitude for what I'd given them, followed immediately by requests for additional favors, help, or services. Not one person had thought to check if I was okay after being completely excluded from gift-giving. Not one person seemed to recognize that their Christmas Eve joke might have been hurtful. I was useful to them as a gift giver, problem solver, and source of professional expertise. But as a person deserving of consideration, love, or basic inclusion in family traditions, apparently, I truly had been forgotten. The revelation sent me to my laptop, where I began what would become a comprehensive analysis of our family dynamics. As a project manager, I was trained to identify patterns, document problems, and develop solutions based on data rather than emotions. If my family wanted to treat me like a resource rather than a relative, then I would approach this situation with the same analytical precision I brought to workplace challenges. Opened a new spreadsheet and began documenting every family interaction I could remember from the past year. Birthdays, holidays, emergencies, celebrations, casual get-togethers. For each event, I noted what I had contributed versus what I had received, not just in terms of gifts, but in emotional support, practical help, and personal investment. The data was staggering. In the past 12 months, I had attended every single family gathering, bringing gifts, food, or both. I had helped Tyler move into his new apartment, spending an entire weekend hauling boxes and cleaning his old place. I had edited Emma's college application essays, spending hours perfecting her personal statements and scholarship applications. I had loaned Mom money for her car repairs and helped Dad research insurance options when his policy increased. I had remembered every birthday, anniversary, and special occasion, sending cards and gifts that arrived precisely on time. I had been the family photographer at gatherings, the designated driver for nights out, and the go-to person whenever anyone needed professional advice, technical support, or emotional encouragement. In return, I had received exactly 4 acknowledgments of my own birthday over the past 3 years. 3 family members had attended my college graduation. 0 had come to the company awards dinner where I'd received recognition for outstanding project management. No one had sent congratulations when I got my promotion, despite my sharing the news in our family group chat. The spreadsheet painted a picture of relationships so one-sided that if they were business partnerships, any competent consultant would recommend immediate termination. I was giving everything and receiving nothing, but I'd been so focused on being the good daughter and reliable sister that I'd never stepped back to evaluate whether these relationships were actually functioning. My phone buzzed with another text from Emma. Also, can you help me move my furniture around? Tyler said he's too busy, but you're always so helpful with stuff like that. Always so helpful. That phrase crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. To my family, I wasn't Sarah, the person with my own needs, desires, and limitations. I was Sarah the helper, the fixer, the giver who could always be counted on to provide whatever was needed without expecting anything in return. The realization was liberating and devastating in equal measure. Liberating because it explained so much about why I'd always felt slightly out of step with my family, despite desperately wanting to belong. Devastating because it meant accepting that the loving family relationships I'd believed in were largely fabrications I'd created by consistently giving more than I received. I spent the rest of Christmas Day diving deeper into this analysis, examining not just recent events but patterns stretching back to childhood. I remembered being the kid who shared her Halloween candy while my siblings hoarded theirs. The teenager who used her part-time job money to buy family birthday gifts while Tyler and Emma gave homemade cards or nothing at all. The college student who came home every break to help with family projects while my siblings found excuses to stay away. Even our childhood Christmas traditions revealed the pattern. I'd always been the one to help Mom with cooking, to assist Dad with decorating, to make sure everyone else's holiday experience was perfect. But when has anyone else taken responsibility for making my Christmas special? The answer was never. Not once. My laptop chimed with an email from my company's HR department, a routine year-end survey about employee satisfaction and career goals. As I filled out the questionnaire, I found myself comparing my professional relationships with my family dynamics. At work, I was valued for my expertise, consulted on important decisions, and recognized for my contributions. My colleagues appreciated my help, but also offered support when I needed it. There was reciprocity, respect, and mutual benefit. My family treated me like an unpaid employee they could summon whenever convenient and ignore otherwise. The comparison sparked an idea that would become the foundation of my strategy. What if I applied the same professional standards to my personal relationships? What if I stopped giving unlimited emotional and practical support to people who couldn't be bothered to remember I existed? I opened a new document and began outlining what I privately called the Mitchell Family Project Plan. Like any major initiative, it would require clear objectives, measurable outcomes, and careful implementation. But unlike my work projects, success wouldn't be measured in deliverables or client satisfaction. It would be measured in whether my family could learn to value me as a person rather than exploit me as a resource. Phase 1 would be immediate disengagement from their requests and demands. No more dropping everything to help with their problems. No more being the family photographer, designated driver, or emergency contact. No more loans, gifts, or services provided without reciprocal consideration. Phase 2 would involve strategic absence from family gatherings and traditions. If my presence was so forgettable that they could exclude me from the Christmas gift exchange without noticing, then perhaps my absence would be more memorable. Phase 3 would be the most challenging, rebuilding relationships on terms that included mutual respect and genuine reciprocity, or accepting that such relationships weren't possible with these particular people. The plan felt both scary and exhilarating. For 28 years, I'd been trying to earn love and acceptance through constant giving. Now I would discover whether my family was capable of loving me for who I was rather than what I could provide. My phone rang, interrupting my planning. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But curiosity won out. "Sarah, honey," she began without preamble, "I need you to stop by the store on your way over tomorrow. We're short on dessert, and you know how your father gets when there's not enough food." "I'm not coming tomorrow," I said quietly. The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Mom spoke again, her voice carrying confusion and slight irritation. "What do you mean you're not coming? It's our family dinner. We always have dinner the day after Christmas." "I have other plans," I said, which was true. My plan was to stay home and continue developing my strategy for dealing with people who forgot I existed. "Other plans?" Mom's voice rose slightly. "Sarah, this is family. What could be more important than family?" The question hung in the air like smoke. What could be more important than family? Perhaps a family that actually treated me like family, rather than a convenient service provider. "I'll talk to you later, Mom," I said gently, ending the call before she could launch into the guilt-inducing speech I'd heard countless times before about family obligations and responsibilities. Within minutes, my phone exploded with texts from Tyler and Emma, clearly briefed by Mom about my unexpected unavailability. The messages followed predictable patterns of manipulation I'd never noticed before, because I'd always capitulated immediately. Tyler: "Come on, Sarah. Don't be dramatic. We were just joking around last night. You know how Dad is." Emma: "Mom says, you're being weird about dinner tomorrow. This isn't like you. Are you sick or something?" Dad: "Your mother says you're upset about something. Don't let whatever's bothering you ruin family time. The messages revealed how little they actually knew me. Don't be dramatic, suggested they viewed any assertion of my needs as unreasonable theater. This isn't like you, indicated they'd never seen me establish boundaries because I never had. Don't let whatever's bothering you ruin family time, implied that my feelings were less important than their comfort. I turned off my phone and spent the evening researching something I'd never thought to examine before: family dynamics and emotional patterns in dysfunctional relationships. The articles I found described concepts like family scapegoating, emotional labor inequality, and parentification, terms that seemed to perfectly describe dynamics I'd experienced but never named. One article in particular resonated deeply. It described how families sometimes designate one member as the giver, the person responsible for maintaining relationships, smoothing conflicts, and providing emotional and practical support to everyone else. The giver's needs become invisible, because their role is to meet other people's needs. When the giver tries to establish boundaries or ask for reciprocity, the family often responds with confusion, guilt-tripping, or accusations of selfishness. The description was so accurate it felt like reading my own biography. Another article discussed something called learned helplessness in family systems, where other members become incapable of handling problems independently because one person consistently rescues them. Tyler's inability to read gaming system instructions despite being a grown man. Emma's expectation that I would edit her professional documents. My parents' assumption that I would handle any inconvenience or extra work that arose. They weren't just taking advantage of my helpfulness. They'd become dependent on it to the point where they genuinely couldn't function normally without my constant intervention. The realization was both empowering and terrifying. If I stopped being their solution to every problem, would they learn to handle things themselves, or would they simply find someone else to exploit? And more importantly, was I prepared for the conflict that would inevitably arise when they realized their reliable resource was no longer available on demand? My laptop pinged with a notification from my work email. Even on Christmas night, my team was coordinating details for our next project launch. But unlike my family's constant demands, these were professional communications among colleagues who respected each other's time and expertise. The contrast was striking. At work, when I helped someone solve a problem, they thanked me and looked for ways to return the favor. When I shared expertise, colleagues acknowledged my contribution and sought my input on future decisions. When I needed assistance, team members offered support without making me feel like I was imposing. Professional relationships were based on mutual benefit and respect. Personal relationships, I was learning, should be held to the same standard. Spent the remaining hours of Christmas night creating detailed documentation of every family interaction from the past 5 years. Phone calls asking for favors. Gifts given versus gifts received. Times I'd been available for their crises versus times they'd been available for mine. Invitations extended to me versus invitations I'd extended to them. The data told an unambiguous story of relationships that were fundamentally extractive rather than supportive. My family had trained me to be their personal assistant, therapist, and ATM, while offering nothing in return except occasional acknowledgement of my usefulness. But unlike the divorce story that had inspired my analytical approach, I wouldn't be revealing evidence of deliberate betrayal or calculated cruelty. My family's treatment of me wasn't malicious. It was simply selfish and thoughtless. They'd never bothered to consider my needs because I'd never required them to. That was about to change. The next morning, I woke up with more clarity than I'd felt in years. The hollow ache in my chest had been replaced by something sharper and more focused: determination. I had a plan, I had data to support it, and I had finally understood that changing this dynamic was entirely within my power. My family had forgotten I existed as anything more than a convenient resource. Now they were about to discover what life looked like when that resource became unavailable. The real question wasn't whether they'd notice my absence. The question was whether they'd care enough to examine why I'd withdrawn, or whether they'd simply find someone else to fill the void I'd left behind. Either way, I would finally have my answer about what I actually meant to the people who claimed to love me. And for the first time in my adult life, I was prepared to accept whatever truth that answer revealed. The first week of January brought an unusual sense of peace to my Lincoln Park apartment. While Chicago struggled through a bitter, cold snap that had the entire city bundled in layers, I found myself energized by the clarity that came with having a concrete plan. My phone sat silent on my kitchen counter, its ringer turned off for the first time in my adult life. 17 missed calls in 3 days, 42 unread text messages, 3 voicemails that grew progressively more agitated as my family realized their designated problem solver had become mysteriously unavailable. I listened to each voicemail with the detached interest of a researcher studying behavioral patterns in their natural habitat. Tyler's first message was predictably self-centered. "Sarah, dude, my internet acting up and I can't figure out how to reset the router. You always know this tech stuff. Call me back ASAP. I've got a work presentation tomorrow." His second message, left 12 hours later, carried the edge of panic. "Seriously, where are you? I had to call some expensive tech support line and they charged me $60 to tell me to unplug the damn thing for 30 seconds. You could have saved me the money and the hassle if you'd just picked up your phone." Emma's communications followed a similar trajectory, evolving from casual requests to frustrated demands. "Sarah, I need help formatting my resume for this job application. The deadline's Friday, and you know I'm hopeless with this stuff." Then, "Hello, it's Wednesday. I sent you the document 2 days ago. Are you ignoring me?" But it was Mom's messages that revealed the most about how my family viewed my role in their lives. Her first voicemail was coded in artificial sweetness. "Hi, honey, just checking in. Dad's wondering if you can help him with his taxes this weekend. You're so good with numbers and paperwork." By her third message, the sweetness had evaporated entirely. "Sarah Mitchell, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this silent treatment is childish and unacceptable. We're family, and family helps each other. You can't just disappear when people need you." The phrase, "when people need you," crystallized everything I'd discovered through my analysis. In Mom's worldview, my value was entirely transactional. I existed to fulfill their needs, and my own needs were irrelevant to the equation. I saved each voicemail, adding them to a growing digital folder I'd labeled evidence. Not because I planned some dramatic courtroom-style confrontation, but because documenting their responses provided valuable data about how they reacted when their usual resource became unavailable. Meanwhile, my work life flourished in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant drain of family demands occupying my mental energy, I found myself more focused and creative at Digital Solutions, Inc. The project I'd been managing was ahead of schedule, and my team had developed innovative solutions that impressed our biggest client. My supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, called me into her office on Thursday afternoon wearing the kind of smile that usually preceded good news. "Sarah, I've been reviewing the quarterly reports, and your team's performance metrics are outstanding," she said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from her desk. "The healthcare system implementation you managed came in 20%, under budget and 3 weeks ahead of schedule. That's the kind of efficiency that gets noticed at the executive level." "Thank you," I replied, feeling genuine pride in work that belonged entirely to me. The team really collaborated well on this one. When everyone's contributions are valued equally, people naturally perform better. Jennifer nodded, then leaned forward with a more serious expression. "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss. We're opening a new West Coast office in Seattle, and we need someone to lead the expansion. It would mean relocating, but it also means a substantial promotion, a significant salary increase, and the opportunity to build a team from the ground up. The offer hung in the air like a gift I hadn't expected, but desperately wanted. Seattle represented everything my current life lacked: a fresh start, professional recognition, and the chance to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. "When would you need an answer?" I asked, already knowing what my decision would be. "Take your time. This is a big life change," Jennifer said. "But I'd like to have confirmation by the end of February so we can begin the transition process if you accept." I walked back to my cubicle feeling lighter than I had in years. The timing felt almost cosmic. Just as I was discovering how little my family valued me, the universe was presenting an opportunity to build a completely new life surrounded by people who appreciated my contributions. That evening, I finally turned my phone back on, curious to see how 3 days of radio silence had affected my family's communication patterns. The message count had nearly doubled. But more interesting than the quantity was the evolution in tone and content. The requests for help had been replaced by expressions of genuine concern, mixed with manipulative guilt-tripping. Dad's latest voicemail exemplified the shift. "Sarah, we're starting to worry about you. It's not like you to just disappear. If you're going through something difficult, you know you can talk to us. But punishing the whole family by ignoring us isn't fair to anyone." The message revealed several fascinating assumptions. First, that my absence was punishment rather than self-preservation. Second, that I owed them constant availability regardless of my own needs. Third, that expressing concern about my well-being was somehow equivalent to actually caring about my well-being. Emma's most recent text was even more revealing. "Sarah, this is getting ridiculous. Whatever we did to upset you, can't we just talk about it like adults? Mom's convinced you're having some kind of breakdown, and Tyler thinks you're being petty about Christmas. Just call us back and tell us what you want. Tell us what you want." The phrase stopped me cold. In 28 years, no family member had ever asked me what I wanted. They'd asked what I could do for them, what I could provide, what I could fix or solve or handle. But my own desires, goals, and needs had never been part of their consideration. Now that they couldn't access my services, they were finally asking about my wants. But only as a means to restore their access, not out of genuine interest in my happiness or well-being. I crafted a response that was brief, professional, and deliberately vague. "I'm fine. Just taking some time to focus on work and personal priorities. We'll be in touch when I'm ready." The response was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with calls I didn't answer and texts that grew increasingly frantic. "Mom, what do you mean, when you're ready? Ready for what? We're your family." Tyler, "This is some seriously passive-aggressive bullshit, Sarah. Just tell us what's wrong instead of playing games." Emma, "Are you punishing us for something? This isn't like you at all." Their reactions confirmed everything I'd suspected about how they viewed our relationships. The idea that I might have legitimate reasons for withdrawing, or that I might need space to evaluate our family dynamics, never occurred to them. In their minds, I was either having an irrational breakdown or engaging in manipulative behavior designed to hurt them. The possibility that their treatment of me might have consequences simply wasn't part of their conceptual framework. Saturday. Morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was enjoying coffee and reading a book about organizational psychology when my apartment buzzer announced someone at the building entrance. The voice through the intercom was unmistakably my mother's. "Sarah, it's Mom. We need to talk." I could have pretended not to be home, but curiosity about how she would handle a face-to-face conversation without the buffer of phone communication made me buzz her up. Mom appeared at my door looking exactly as I'd expected. Perfectly put together, on the surface, but with the tight expression around her eyes that indicated barely controlled frustration. She carried a small gift bag, probably intended as a peace offering or guilt-inducing prop. Well, you certainly look healthy for someone who's been too overwhelmed to return phone calls, she said, inviting herself into my apartment with the assumption of welcome that characterized all her interactions with me. Would you like some coffee? I offered, maintaining the pleasant but neutral tone I'd perfected for difficult client meetings. I'd like to understand what's going on with you, Mom replied, settling into my armchair as if preparing for a lengthy interrogation. Your father and I are very concerned about this behavior. It's not like you to just cut off communication with your family. I sent a text explaining that I was focusing on work and personal priorities, I reminded her calmly. That's not an explanation, that's an excuse, Mom said, her voice sharpening. We're your family, Sarah. Family comes first. Whatever's bothering you, we can work it out, but not if you refuse to communicate. The conversation was unfolding exactly as I'd predicted. Mom was framing my boundary setting as a character flaw while positioning herself as the reasonable party trying to resolve an unreasonable situation. The script was so familiar I could have recited her next lines from memory. Speaking of communication, I said, retrieving a folder from my kitchen counter. I've been doing some thinking about our family dynamics over the past few years. I spread out several printed pages on my coffee table, spreadsheets showing gift-giving, patterns, calendars highlighting family events I'd attended versus those family members had attended for me, and a timeline of requests for help I'd received versus support I'd been offered. Mom stared at the documents with confusion, as if I'd presented her with materials written in a foreign language. What is all this? She asked. Data, I replied simply. Information about how our family relationships actually function, as opposed to how we like to think they function. I walked her through the analysis systematically, the same way I would present project findings to corporate stakeholders. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Over the past 3 years, I had attended every family gathering, birthday celebration, and holiday event. I had given gifts totaling over $4,000. I had provided approximately 200 hours of unpaid labor in the form of help with moves, technical support, document editing, and problem solving. In return, 3 family members had attended my birthday celebrations. I had received gifts totaling approximately $300. I had been offered help with my own problems exactly twice, both times when I'd explicitly asked and then been made to feel guilty for needing assistance. Sarah, this is... Mom started, then stopped, apparently unable to find words for what she was looking at. This is what? I prompted gently. This is not how families work, she said finally. You don't keep score in relationships. You don't create spreadsheets about love and support. You're right, I agreed. Healthy families don't need to keep score because the give and take is naturally balanced. But look at these numbers, Mom. Does this look balanced to you? She stared at the data for a long moment, and I could see her struggling to reconcile the evidence with her preferred narrative about our family relationships. You've always been the helpful one, she said eventually. That's just your personality. You like helping people. I do like helping people, I confirmed. But I also like being valued for more than my usefulness. I like having my own needs considered. I like receiving the same thoughtfulness and care that I give to others. Mom's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching defensiveness. We do value you, Sarah. You know we love you. Do you? I asked quietly. Because on Christmas Eve, when I was the only person who didn't receive a single gift, Dad's response was to joke that you'd forgotten I existed. And everyone laughed. If you love and value me, how do you explain that? The question hung in the air like smoke. Mom's face went through several expressions: surprise, discomfort, defensiveness, before settling on frustrated dismissal. Your father was just making a joke. You know how his sense of humor is. He didn't mean anything by it. What if Tyler had been the one without gifts? I asked. Would Dad have made the same joke about forgetting Tyler existed? The silence that followed was answer enough. We both knew that if Tyler or Emma had been excluded from gift-giving, there would have been immediate apologies, rushed trips to stores, and genuine distress about the oversight. But because it was me, because I was the helpful one who could be counted on not to make waves, my exclusion had become a punchline. "I think you're overreacting to what was essentially a thoughtless mistake," Mom said, her tone taking on the patronizing quality she used when she wanted to end discussions that made her uncomfortable. "Maybe I am," I said mildly. "But overreacting? Or not, I've decided to make some changes in how I approach family relationships." "What kind of changes?" The question carried a wariness that suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be to her liking. "I'm going to start treating family relationships the same way I treat professional relationships," I explained. "With mutual respect, reciprocal, consideration, and clear boundaries about what I can and cannot provide." Mom's expression hardened. "That sounds very cold, Sarah. Family isn't supposed to work like a business transaction." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Family should work much better than a business transaction. Family should involve unconditional love, genuine care for each other's well-being, and natural reciprocity born from affection rather than obligation. But if that's not what we have, then professional courtesy is still an improvement over being taken for granted." She left shortly afterward, taking her peace-offering gift bag with her and promising to talk sense into Dad and my siblings about whatever had gotten into me. I watched from my window as she sat in her car for several minutes, probably calling the rest of the family to report on her unsuccessful intervention. That evening, my phone exploded with responses to whatever Mom had told them about our conversation. The messages revealed that she'd presented my analysis as evidence of some kind of mental breakdown rather than a legitimate assessment of family dynamics. Tyler: "Mom says you made charts about Christmas presents? Dude, that's seriously weird. Are you seeing a therapist or something?" Emma: "I can't believe you actually made spreadsheets about family stuff. That's so cold and calculating. We're not a business, Sarah." Dad: "Your mother says you're upset about my joke on Christmas Eve. I didn't mean anything by it, and I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt. But this scorekeeping behavior is concerning." Their responses perfectly illustrated the problem I'd been trying to explain. Rather than examining whether their treatment of me might be problematic, they decided that my response to their treatment was the real issue. Rather than considering whether more balanced relationships might benefit everyone, they'd concluded that my desire for reciprocity was evidence of psychological instability. The dynamic was so predictable, it felt like watching a play I'd seen performed countless times before. The only difference was that for the first time, I wasn't playing my assigned role. As January drew to a close, I found myself looking forward to Monday's conversation with Jennifer Walsh about the Seattle opportunity. My family's response to 3 weeks of reduced availability had told me everything I needed to know about their capacity for self-reflection and change. They missed my services, not my presence. They wanted to restore access to my help, not rebuild relationships based on mutual care and respect. They were concerned about my behavior only insofar as it affected their convenience. The realization was painful but liberating. I'd spent 28 years trying to earn love that simply wasn't available from these particular people. They were capable of appreciating my usefulness, but not of valuing my personhood. Seattle was beginning to look like more than just a career opportunity. It was starting to look like freedom. The only question remaining was whether I'd tell my family about my decision before or after I'd already moved 3,000 miles away from their constant demands and casual cruelty. Given their reaction to 3 weeks of reduced availability, I was genuinely curious to see how they'd handle my complete absence from their lives. But unlike the Christmas Eve exclusion that had started this entire journey, my departure would be carefully planned, strategically executed, and entirely on my own terms. The Mitchell family was about to learn what it really meant when someone they'd forgotten existed actually did disappear. February arrived with a blizzard. That shut down half of Chicago, but my apartment felt warmer and more peaceful than it had in years. I'd accepted Jennifer's offer 3 days earlier, signing a contract that would relocate me to Seattle by the end of March. The signing bonus alone exceeded what my family had spent on gifts for me in the past decade combined. The irony wasn't lost on me. Complete strangers at a corporation valued my contributions enough to offer substantial financial incentives to secure my services, while my own family couldn't remember to include me in the Christmas gift exchange. I hadn't told anyone about Seattle yet. Part of me wanted to savor the secret a little longer, to enjoy the knowledge that I held the power to completely reshape my life, while my family continued their increasingly desperate attempts to restore their access to my services. The attempts had evolved from irritated demands to elaborate guilt campaigns. Emma had started sending childhood photos with captions like, "Remember when we used to be close?" Tyler had switched tactics entirely, offering to pay me for technical support, as if the problem was that I needed financial incentives rather than basic, human consideration. But it was Dad's latest strategy that revealed just how little he understood about what was actually happening. He'd begun leaving voicemails that positioned him as the family peacemaker trying to heal whatever mysterious rift had developed. "Sarah, I know you're going through something difficult right now," his most recent message began. "Sometimes when people are stressed, they lash out at the people closest to them. But we're family, and family forgives each other. Whatever's bothering you, we can work through it together." The message was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as concern. By framing my boundary setting as lashing out, he avoided any examination of their behavior. By suggesting I was going through something difficult, he implied my reaction was based on external stress rather than their treatment of me. And by positioning himself as the magnanimous family member willing to forgive my unreasonable behavior, he completely inverted the actual power dynamic. I saved the voicemail in my growing evidence folder, adding it to a collection that now painted a comprehensive picture of how my family responded when their established patterns were disrupted. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected call from my cousin Jessica, someone I'd barely spoken to since we were teenagers. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd been recruited for a delicate mission. "Hey, Sarah. It's Jessica. I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue like this." "Not at all," I replied, curious about what role she'd been asked to play in my family's latest campaign. "Your mom called my mom, and apparently there's some kind of situation going on," Jessica said, her discomfort with the conversation evident in her tone. "She asked me to reach out because she thought you might be more willing to talk to someone outside the immediate family." The request confirmed something I'd suspected. My family was now recruiting extended relatives to pressure me into resuming my role as their designated problem solver. Rather than examining their own behavior, they were expanding their manipulation network. "What exactly did my mother tell your mother?" I asked. Jessica hesitated before answering. "She said you've been acting strange since Christmas, cutting off communication and refusing to help with family things. She's worried you might be having some kind of breakdown or going through a difficult time that's affecting your judgment." The characterization was exactly what I'd expected. In Mom's version of events, I was the problem that needed to be fixed, not the symptom of relationships that needed to be examined. "Jessica, can I ask you something honestly?" I said. "In your own experience with our family, have you ever noticed patterns in how different people are treated?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when family gatherings happen, who does the work? Who brings the food? Who cleans up? Who handles the logistics? And when people need help with something, who do they call?" There was a long pause before Jessica answered, and when she spoke, her voice had lost its carefully neutral tone. No, now that you mention it, you do seem to handle a lot of the organizational stuff, and you're always the one people call when they need help with technical things or professional advice. And what happens to people who ask for help in return?" I pressed gently, another pause, longer this time. I'm not sure I've ever seen you ask for help with anything. That's because the few times I have, I was made to feel like I was imposing, I explained. So I learned not to ask. Jessica's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a different quality entirely. Sarah, I think I owe you an apology. Your mom painted this picture of you being unreasonable and difficult, but what you're describing, I've actually noticed some of these patterns myself. I just never thought about them consciously. You don't owe me an apology, I said gently. But I appreciate you being willing to actually listen, instead of just accepting someone else's narrative about what's happening. Are you okay? Jessica asked, and for the first time in weeks, the question sounded genuine rather than manipulative. I'm better than I've been in years, I said honestly. I'm finally understanding some things about myself and my relationships that I should have figured out a long time ago. We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the end of the conversation, Jessica had volunteered information that confirmed several patterns I'd suspected but couldn't prove. She'd noticed that family gatherings always seemed to revolve around my logistics and coordination. She'd observed that I was always available to help others, but rarely asked for assistance myself. She'd even commented to her own mother about how much work I seemed to do compared to Tyler and Emma. I never realized how one-sided it all was until you pointed it out, Jessica admitted. But now that I think about it, you're kind of the family's unpaid assistant, aren't you? The phrase hit me like a physical blow, not because it was inaccurate, but because it was so perfectly accurate. Unpaid assistant. That's exactly what I'd become, and I'd been so busy trying to be good at the job that I'd never stopped to question whether I should be doing it at all. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring out at the snow-covered city, processing what felt like the first honest conversation about my family I'd ever had with another family member. Jessica's willingness to actually examine the patterns rather than dismiss my concerns had been validating in a way I hadn't expected. It also highlighted just how unusual her response was. In 6 weeks of reduced availability, not one member of my immediate family had asked whether their treatment of me might be problematic. They diagnosed me with everything from stress-induced breakdown to manipulative attention-seeking, but they'd never once considered that their own behavior might need examination. That afternoon brought a development that would change everything. I was reviewing code for a client presentation when my phone rang with Emma's number. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Sarah, thank God." Emma's voice was breathless with panic. "I need you to come to Mom and Dad's house right now. There's been an accident." Every instinct I'd developed over 28 years of being the family emergency responder kicked in immediately. "What kind of accident? Is everyone okay?" "Dad fell off a ladder while trying to fix something in the garage," Emma explained rapidly. "He's conscious, but his leg is definitely broken and possibly his wrist too. Mom's completely freaking out, and Tyler's at work. I don't know what to do, and the ambulance is taking forever because of the snow." For a moment, I was back in my old role, mentally calculating drive times and considering what I'd need to bring to help manage the crisis. Then I stopped myself and asked a question that would have been unthinkable 6 weeks earlier. "Emma, what exactly do you need me to do that you can't handle yourself?" The question seemed to confuse her. "What do you mean? You always handle this kind of stuff. You know how to deal with insurance and medical forms and all that complicated paperwork." "I know how to deal with those things because I'm an adult who's learned to manage practical responsibilities," I said calmly. "But so are you. You're 26 years old with a college degree. You can read insurance cards and fill out forms." "Sarah, this isn't the time for whatever point you're trying to make." Emma's voice rose with frustration. "Dad is hurt and we need help." "You need help or you need me specifically?" I asked. "What's the difference?" Emma shot back. "The difference is whether you actually need assistance or whether you just want someone else to handle responsibilities that belong to you," I explained. Have you called Dad's insurance company? Have you gathered his medical information? Have you contacted his doctor's office to let them know about the accident? No, I thought you would. You thought I would handle everything while you waited for someone else to solve the problem, I finished. Emma, I'm not coming. Not because I don't care about Dad, but because you and Mom are perfectly capable of handling this situation yourselves. The silence that followed was so complete I thought she might have hung up. When she spoke again, her voice was barely controlled fury. I can't believe you're doing this. Dad is hurt and you're playing games about proving some ridiculous point. This is my family, Sarah. Real emergencies don't care about whatever petty grievances you're nursing. You're right that emergencies don't care about grievances, I agreed. But this isn't about grievances. This is about the fact that you've all become so dependent on me handling problems that you can't function normally when I'm not available. So, you're just going to let Dad suffer because you're mad about Christmas presents? Emma's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine distress. Dad isn't going to suffer because I'm not there, I said firmly. He's going to receive exactly the same medical care whether I fill out insurance forms or you do. The only difference is that you'll have to handle adult responsibilities instead of calling me to do it for you. I hung up before Emma could respond, but my hands were shaking as I set the phone down. This was the test I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. A genuine family emergency that would reveal whether my absence actually mattered, or whether it just inconvenienced people who preferred to have someone else handle difficult tasks. My phone immediately started buzzing with calls I didn't answer, and texts that grew increasingly desperate as the afternoon progressed. Tyler. Emma told me about Dad and that you're refusing to help. What the hell is wrong with you? Mom. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, I am appalled by your behavior. Your father is injured and needs his family's support. Emma. I had to figure out all the insurance stuff myself, and it was a nightmare. I hope you're happy that you made everything 10 times harder during a crisis. The messages revealed exactly what I'd suspected. They were angry that I hadn't made their emergency easier to handle, not that Dad had received inadequate care. Emma had successfully managed the insurance paperwork despite claiming she couldn't handle it. Mom had coordinated with medical staff, despite insisting she needed my help. Tyler had apparently left work early to assist, despite initially claiming he was too busy. They'd handled the crisis just fine without me. They were just angry that they'd had to handle it themselves. Late that evening, I received a text from Jessica. Heard about your dad's accident. Also heard about your family's reaction to you not dropping everything to help. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. They managed just fine without you, didn't they? Her message was followed by a detailed account of how the emergency had actually unfolded. Dad had been treated at the emergency room and released with a cast on his leg and a brace on his wrist. Mom had successfully communicated with insurance representatives and medical staff. Emma had competently filled out paperwork and coordinated follow-up appointments. Tyler had arranged time off work to help Dad get settled at home. The family had functioned perfectly well in crisis mode without their designated problem solver. They'd simply had to take responsibility for tasks they'd grown accustomed to delegating to me. But instead of recognizing their own competence, they'd focused their energy on being angry that I hadn't made their lives easier. The possibility that they might have learned something valuable about their own capabilities never occurred to them. That night, I made a decision that had been crystallizing since Christmas Eve. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email. That would explain my decision to move to Seattle and my reasons for accepting the transfer. The message wasn't angry or accusatory. It was simply factual, laying out the patterns I'd identified and the conclusions I'd reached about our family relationships. I explained that I loved them, but could no longer participate in dynamics that cast me solely as a resource rather than a person deserving of reciprocal care and consideration. Wrote about the spreadsheets and data analysis, not to hurt them, but to help them understand that my withdrawal wasn't based on emotion or temporary stress. but on objective assessment of how our relationships actually functioned. I included information about my professional success and the opportunities that awaited me in Seattle, emphasizing that I was moving toward something positive rather than running away from something negative. Most importantly, I explained that my decision wasn't punishment for their behavior, but simply a recognition that I deserved relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. If they couldn't provide that, I needed to find people who could. The email took me 3 hours to write and edit. When I finally sent it at midnight on February 15th, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't experienced since childhood. For the first time in my adult life, I'd communicated my needs clearly and honestly, without worrying about managing other people's emotional reactions. My family was about to learn that the person they'd forgotten existed had been paying very close attention all along, and she'd decided that being forgotten was actually a gift that freed her to build a life where she would never be invisible again. The responses would come, I knew. There would be anger, guilt-tripping, and attempts to minimize or dismiss everything I'd shared. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, their reactions wouldn't determine my actions. I'd already made my choice. The only question remaining was whether they'd make any effort to understand it, or whether they'd simply look for someone else to fill the void I was leaving behind. Either way, Sarah Mitchell was finally disappearing on her own terms. And unlike their Christmas Eve joke about forgetting I existed, this disappearance would be permanent, strategic, and entirely under my control. The explosion came exactly 18 hours after I'd sent the email. My phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. with Mom's number, followed immediately by Tyler, then Emma, then Dad despite his injuries. When I didn't answer any of them, the voicemails began accumulating with the rapid-fire intensity of a digital avalanche. Let them pile up while I made coffee and prepared for what I knew would be a day of reckoning. Through my apartment windows, Chicago looked pristine under fresh snow, the kind of clean white blanket that made the city appear innocent and new. The irony wasn't lost on me that my own life was about to undergo a similar transformation. Mom's first voicemail was pure fury, barely contained within the bounds of civility. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, I have read your email, and I am absolutely appalled. How dare you reduce our family relationships to spreadsheets and statistics? How dare you characterize people who love you as users and manipulators? You owe us an explanation for this cruel and hurtful attack on your own family. Tyler's message was more direct. What the actual hell, Sarah? You wrote a 10-page manifesto about how terrible we all are? This is some seriously unhinged behavior. You need professional help, not a cross-country move. Emma's voicemail carried the tremor of someone who'd been crying. I can't believe you think so little of us. Yes, we ask for your help sometimes, but that's what families do. We help each other. The fact that you've been keeping score this whole time is honestly heartbreaking. But it was Dad's message that revealed the family's fundamental strategy for dealing with my revelations. Sarah, your mother showed me that email you sent. I'm disappointed that you would choose to air family business in such a clinical, cold way. Whatever problems you think exist between us can be worked out through honest conversation, not by running away to another state. Each message followed the same pattern. Deny the validity of my observations, reframe my analysis as evidence of mental instability, and position my departure as abandonment rather than self-preservation. Not one family member acknowledged that the data I'd presented might be accurate. Not one person expressed curiosity about why I might have felt the need to document our interactions. Not one voice suggested that perhaps my feelings were worth examining rather than dismissing. I was transcribing the voicemails for my records when Jessica called. Her number had become the only one I answered immediately. I'm guessing you've heard from everyone by now, she said without preamble. 18 voicemails and counting, I confirmed. How much of my email did they share with you? your mom called. My mom at 7 this morning to complain about your vicious attack on the family, Jessica said, and I could hear the eye roll in her voice. She read selected passages out loud, the ones that sounded most damning out of context. Let me guess. The parts about tracking gifts and documenting requests for help, but not the parts about years of one-sided relationships and emotional neglect? Exactly, Jessica confirmed. She painted it as you having some kind of breakdown and creating conspiracy theories about people who love you. I wasn't surprised. Presenting my analysis out of context while omitting the supporting evidence was a classic. Manipulation technique. By sharing only the most clinical-sounding elements of my email, Mom could make my conclusions appear unreasonable without addressing the patterns that had led to those conclusions. Jessica, can I ask you to do something that might be uncomfortable? I said. Depends what it is, but probably yes. Can you ask your mother to request a complete copy of my email from my mom? Tell her you want to understand the full situation before taking sides. Then read the whole thing and tell me if my analysis seems as unhinged as your aunt claims. Jessica. Agreed immediately, and we arranged to talk again that evening after she'd had time to review the complete document. Meanwhile, my phone continued its relentless buzzing. The family had apparently established a tag-team approach to wearing down my resistance through sheer volume of communication. When one person finished leaving a voicemail, another would call within minutes. The messages were evolving as the day progressed. The morning's pure outrage was giving way to more sophisticated emotional manipulation. Tyler's second message attempted concern. Look, I know you're going through something difficult. Maybe work stress is affecting your perspective on family stuff, but you can't just move across the country because you're upset about Christmas. Emma's follow-up tried guilt. I keep thinking about all the good times we've had together, all the family traditions that mean so much to all of us. How can you just throw all of that away over some perceived slights? Mom's afternoon message deployed the heavy artillery of maternal disappointment. I don't know where I went wrong as a mother that my daughter would develop such a cold, calculating view of family love. But I refuse to believe this is who you really are, Sarah. This isn't the daughter I raised. Each message revealed more about their mindset than they probably intended. The consistent themes were that my perspective was distorted, my analysis was inappropriate, and my decision to leave was an overreaction to minor issues. Not once did anyone engage with the specific examples I'd provided. Not once did anyone acknowledge that feeling excluded or taken for granted might be legitimate responses to their behavior. Around 3 o'clock, an unexpected number appeared. On my phone. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, my father's physician. I answered immediately, concerned that Dad's injuries might have worsened. Ms. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, Dr. Hendricks said. Your father asked me to contact you about his recovery process. Is everything okay with his injuries? I asked. Oh yes, he's healing beautifully. Remarkably well for someone his age, actually, she replied. But he seems to be under the impression that his recovery requires assistance from someone with medical training or specialized knowledge. I paused, processing the implications of what she was telling me. Doctor, are you saying that Dad doesn't actually need special care for his injuries? Not at all. Broken bones heal the same way whether family members have medical backgrounds or not, Dr. Hendricks said with what sounded like professional amusement. Your father has asked me 3 times today about proper procedures for managing his care at home. When I explained that his treatment plan is quite straightforward, he mentioned that his daughter was very knowledgeable about medical matters and usually coordinated his health care. The conversation revealed another layer of the pattern I'd identified. Dad wasn't just asking for my help. He was creating artificial complexity around simple situations to justify his dependence on my intervention. Dr. Hendricks, can I ask what specific care Dad actually needs at home? Keep the cast dry, take over-the-counter pain medication as needed, and attend follow-up appointments in 2 weeks, she said. It's about as straightforward as medical care gets. After we hung up, I found myself laughing for the first time in weeks. Dad had been calling me all morning, claiming he needed my expertise to manage his recovery from injuries that required nothing more complicated than keeping a cast dry and taking Advil. The revelation crystallized something I'd been suspecting, but couldn't prove. My family didn't just take advantage of my helpfulness. They actively manufactured crises and complications to justify their dependence on me. When Jessica called that evening, her voice carried a gravity I'd never heard from her before. "Sarah, I read your entire email," she began. "And I owe you more than an apology. I owe you acknowledgement that what you described isn't perception or misunderstanding. It's systematic exploitation disguised as family love." Her words hit me with unexpected force. For months, I'd been questioning my own judgment, wondering if I was being too sensitive or analytical about normal family dynamics. Having someone else examine the evidence and reach the same conclusions felt like validation I hadn't realized I desperately needed. "The gift-giving analysis alone is staggering," Jessica continued. "But what really got to me was the timeline of support requests versus support offered. Sarah, in 3 years, you provided over 200 hours of unpaid labor to family members who offered you assistance exactly twice. That's not family. That's indentured servitude." She paused, and, when she spoke again, her voice was angry on my behalf, and the way they're responding to your email proves every point you made. Instead of examining their behavior, they're attacking your character. Instead of acknowledging the patterns you documented, they're dismissing your feelings as invalid. They're more concerned about losing their personal assistant than losing their daughter. Jessica's analysis confirmed what I'd suspected but was afraid to articulate. My family's response to my revelations was itself evidence of everything I'd accused them of. People who genuinely loved me would have been horrified to learn they'd been taking advantage of me. They would have asked how they could do better, not attacked me for pointing out the problems. "There's something else," Jessica added. "I talked to my mom about some of the patterns you mentioned, and she admitted she's noticed them too. She said she's always felt uncomfortable with how much work you do at family gatherings compared to Tyler and Emma, but she never said anything, because it wasn't her place." The revelation didn't surprise me, but it added another dimension to my understanding of the family dynamics. Other people had noticed the inequality in our relationships, but the conspiracy of silence around uncomfortable truths had protected the status quo that benefited everyone except me. "What are you going to do now?" Jessica asked. "Exactly what I planned," I said firmly. "I'm moving to Seattle in 5 weeks. I'm starting a new job where my contributions are valued and reciprocated, and I'm building relationships with people who see me as more than a convenient resource." "Good," Jessica said with fierce satisfaction. "And for what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave for recognizing these patterns and having the strength to change them." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment processing the day's revelations. My family's response to my email had been exactly what I'd predicted: denial, deflection, and character assassination. They'd proven incapable of the self-reflection that might have salvaged our relationships. But Jessica's validation and Dr. Hendrix's inadvertent confirmation of Dad's manufactured helplessness had provided something even more valuable: absolute certainty that my analysis was correct and my decision was necessary. I opened my laptop and began documenting the day's communications, adding them to my growing file of evidence. Not because I planned to use them as weapons, but because maintaining clear records helped me resist the gaslighting that was now coming at me from multiple directions simultaneously. The voicemails had continued accumulating throughout the day, 27 in total by evening. The later messages showed increasing desperation as my family realized that their usual tactics weren't working. Emma's final message of the day was perhaps the most revealing. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what you wrote, and maybe some of it is true. Maybe we do rely on you more than we should. But that's because you're so competent and reliable. We trust you to handle things because you're good at handling things. Isn't that a compliment? The message perfectly encapsulated the fundamental problem with our relationships. Emma could acknowledge that they relied on me excessively, but she framed their exploitation as flattery. She could admit they took advantage of my competence, but she positioned their selfishness as trust. Even when forced to confront the truth about their behavior, they couldn't acknowledge that it might be problematic or unfair. They could only reframe it as evidence of my value to them, as if being useful to people who gave nothing in return was the highest compliment they could offer. Tyler's last message attempted a different approach. Look, if you want us to appreciate you more, we can do that. We can make more effort to include you in things and remember to get you gifts. But you don't have to move across the country to make your point. We get it now. The offer revealed how little he understood about what was actually happening. He was treating my departure like a negotiation tactic designed to extract better treatment, not recognizing that I'd already moved beyond wanting better treatment from people incapable of providing it. Dad's final voicemail was perhaps the most manipulative. Sarah, I'm lying here with a broken leg, thinking about how disappointed I am that my daughter would abandon her family during a time of need. I raised you to be better than this. I raised you to understand that family comes first, no matter what. The message was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, combining physical vulnerability, paternal disappointment, and moral judgment into a weapon designed to make me feel guilty for prioritizing my own well-being over their convenience. But instead of guilt, I felt nothing but clarity. Dad's appeal to family loyalty would have been compelling if he'd shown any loyalty to me. His disappointment in my character would have hurt if he'd ever demonstrated genuine interest in my character. His claim that I was abandoning them during need would have mattered if they'd ever been available during my times of need. The day had provided final confirmation that my family was exactly what I'd suspected. A group of people who'd learned to exploit my kindness and mistake my tolerance for weakness. They were capable of love, but only conditional love based on what I could provide rather than who I was. As I prepared for bed, I felt a sense of peace that had been building since Christmas Eve. Tomorrow would bring more voicemails, more attempts at manipulation, and more evidence that I'd made the right choice. But their words could no longer touch me because I'd finally understood the fundamental truth about our relationships. I had been loving people who were incapable of loving me back in the same way. The Sarah who had sat on their couch listening to jokes about being forgotten was gone forever. In her place was someone who knew exactly what she deserved, and had the strength to pursue it, regardless of who disapproved. Seattle was no longer just a job opportunity. It was freedom from a family that had never seen me as anything more than a resource to be exploited, and for the first time in 28 years, I was perfectly fine with disappointing them. The ambush came on a Thursday evening in early March, 3 weeks before my planned departure to Seattle. I was packing books when my apartment buzzer announced an unexpected visitor. Through the intercom, Mom's voice carried the artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something particularly difficult. Sarah, honey, it's Mom. I'm here with Tyler and Emma. We need to talk. I stood frozen in my living room, boxes half-packed around me, processing the implications of a coordinated family intervention at my door. They'd clearly decided that phone calls and voicemails weren't sufficient to change my mind about leaving Chicago. Now they were escalating to a face-to-face confrontation designed to overwhelm my defenses through sheer numbers and emotional pressure. I'm busy packing tonight, I said through the intercom, maintaining the boundary I'd established weeks earlier. That's exactly what we need to discuss, Mom replied, her voice carrying the edge of someone who wouldn't be deterred easily. We can't let you make this mistake without at least trying to talk sense into you. The phrase, talk sense into you, revealed everything about how they viewed this intervention. They weren't coming to understand my perspective or examine their own behavior. They were coming to convince me that my analysis was wrong and my decision was irrational. Against my better judgment, curiosity about their strategy made me buzz them up. I opened my apartment door and waited, watching through the hallway as three people who shared my DNA but clearly didn't understand my character approached with the determined expressions of missionaries convinced they were saving a lost soul. Mom entered first, her eyes immediately scanning my apartment with visible shock at the packed boxes and dismantled furniture. Tyler followed, looking uncomfortable but resigned, like someone who'd been drafted for a mission he didn't fully support. Emma came last, her face already showing signs of the tears she'd probably been crying since they'd planned this intervention. "Oh, Sarah," Mom said, her voice breaking slightly as she surveyed the evidence of my impending departure. "You're really doing this. You're really leaving." "I told you I was moving to Seattle," I said calmly, gesturing for them to sit on the couch that would be picked up by movers in 2 weeks. "Nothing about my decision has changed." Tyler shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the boxes labeled kitchen and bedroom with black marker. "This seems pretty extreme, Sarah. Moving across the country because you're upset about family stuff?" "I'm not upset about family stuff," I corrected. "I'm making a strategic decision about where to invest my time and energy based on where I receive the most value and respect in return." Emma's composure cracked immediately. "Value and respect? Sarah, we're your family. We love you. How can you reduce that to some kind of business transaction?" The question perfectly illustrated the fundamental disconnect between us. Emma could speak about love while simultaneously demonstrating complete inability to recognize how their treatment of me contradicted that love. Mom settled into my armchair with the air of someone preparing for a lengthy negotiation. "Sarah, we've all been talking since you sent that email, and we realize that maybe we haven't always been as appreciative as we should have been." "Maybe?" I asked quietly. "Okay, we definitely haven't been appreciative enough," Mom amended. "But that doesn't mean you should destroy our family by moving across the country. We can do better. We want to do better." I sat across from them, these 3 people who'd known me my entire life, but had never bothered to truly see me, and felt the strange calm that comes with absolute clarity about a situation. "What specifically do you want to do better?" I asked. The question seemed to catch them off guard. They'd apparently prepared emotional appeals and guilt-inducing arguments, but they hadn't developed concrete plans for addressing the patterns I'd documented. Tyler cleared his throat. "Well, we could make sure to include you more in family activities, and remember to get you gifts for holidays and birthdays. And we could be more thoughtful about asking for help," Emma added quickly. "Like, maybe not always assuming you'll drop everything to solve our problems." Mom nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We can establish better balance in our relationships, more give and take." I listened to their proposals with the same analytical attention I brought to client presentations at work. They were offering to treat me marginally better in exchange for me abandoning a career opportunity and staying available for their convenience. "Those sound like reasonable improvements," I said diplomatically. "But I'm curious about something. What consequences would there be if you didn't follow through on these promises?" Another moment of confused silence. They'd assumed I would be grateful for their willingness to make superficial changes, and the idea that I might want accountability measures had never occurred to them. "What do you mean, consequences?" Mom asked. "I mean, what happens if 6 months from now, Tyler calls me at midnight because his internet isn't working and he can't figure out how to restart his router? What happens if Emma expects me to edit her job applications without offering reciprocal help with my projects? What happens if you ask me to coordinate Dad's medical appointments but don't remember my birthday?" They exchanged glances, clearly, realizing that I was asking for something more substantial than vague promises to do better. "We would apologize and try harder," Emma said weakly. "You've been apologizing and promising to try harder for years," I observed. "But the patterns never actually change. Why would this time be different?" Tyler's frustration was becoming visible. "Because now we know you're serious about this stuff. We didn't realize it was such a big deal to you before. You didn't realize it was a big deal that I was excluded from Christmas gift exchanges? You didn't realize it was a big deal that I provided hundreds of hours of unpaid labor without receiving equivalent support? You didn't realize it was a big deal that Dad joked about forgetting I existed? Each question landed like a physical blow, and I could see them struggling to maintain their narrative that these were minor oversights rather than systematic patterns of disregard. Mom's approach shifted to direct emotional manipulation. Sarah, I understand you're hurt, and you have every right to be. But family isn't about keeping score or maintaining perfect balance. Family is about loving each other despite our flaws and working together through difficult times. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Family should be about unconditional love and mutual support. But that's not what we have. What we have is a system where I provide unconditional support and you provide conditional love based on my usefulness to you. That's not true, Emma protested, tears starting to flow freely. We love you for who you are, not what you do for us. Emma, when was the last time any of you called me just to see how I was doing, without needing help with something? I asked, gently. The silence that followed was answer enough. In their worldview, checking on my well-being wasn't something that occurred to them independently. They contacted me when they needed something, and they assumed I was fine unless I explicitly stated otherwise. Tyler tried a different tactic. Look, maybe we haven't been perfect siblings, but that doesn't mean you should blow up your entire life over it. You've got a good job here, friends, a nice apartment. Why throw all that away? I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm taking a promotion that will advance my career significantly. I'm moving to a city I've always wanted to explore. I'm creating opportunities to build new relationships with people who value reciprocity and mutual respect. But what about us? Mom's voice cracked with genuine distress. What about your family? The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. What about them? What about people who'd forgotten I existed? What about relationships that drained me emotionally and practically while giving nothing meaningful? In return? What about me? I countered quietly. For 28 years, I've prioritized your needs, your comfort, your convenience. I've been the reliable daughter, the helpful sister, the designated problem solver. When do I get to prioritize my own happiness? Emma was sobbing openly now. You're acting like we're terrible people who never cared about you. But we do care. We love you so much. I believe you love me the way you're capable of loving, I said gently. But your love comes with conditions and expectations that aren't sustainable for me anymore. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with a folder I'd prepared for exactly this conversation. Inside were printed copies of every text message, voicemail, and email from the past 2 months, organized chronologically and categorized by type of request or manipulation tactic. This is what your love looks like in practice, I said, spreading the documents across my coffee table. 43 requests for help, 17 guilt-inducing messages, 29 attempts to make me feel responsible for your emotional well-being, 0 expressions of interest in my professional success, personal goals, or individual happiness. They stared at the evidence in silence, and I could see the moment when they realized I hadn't been exaggerating or misremembering anything. I had documentation of everything, presented with the same analytical precision I brought to workplace challenges. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. You've been keeping records of our conversations? I started documenting patterns after Christmas Eve, when I realized I needed objective data to understand what was happening in our relationships. I explained. The documentation helped me recognize that my feelings weren't based on oversensitivity or misunderstanding, but on consistent patterns of one-sided interaction. Tyler picked up one of the printed emails, reading his own words back to himself with visible discomfort. This makes us look like selfish assholes. I didn't make you look like anything. I said calmly. I simply recorded what you said and did. If that creates an unflattering picture, perhaps the problem isn't with the documentation. Emma's tears had evolved into quiet hiccups as she processed the evidence spread before her. Sarah, I had no idea it was this bad. I never realized how much we were asking of you or how little we were giving back. For a moment, I felt hope that maybe, finally, someone in my family was capable of genuine self-reflection and change. I'm sorry, Emma continued. We all are. We can fix this if you'll give us another chance. But then she added the words that shattered any possibility of reconciliation. Just please don't abandon us by moving to Seattle. Even in her moment of apparent understanding, Emma's primary concern was preventing my departure rather than addressing the underlying problems. She was sorry about their behavior, but only because it was driving me away, not because it had been harmful to me. Mom stood up, her expression hardening as she realized their emotional appeals weren't working. Sarah, I'm going to say something that might sound harsh, but I think you need to hear it. This obsession with documenting and analyzing family relationships isn't healthy. Normal people don't create spreadsheets about love and support. You're right, I agreed. Normal people don't need to create spreadsheets because normal relationships have natural reciprocity. But our relationships aren't normal, and they haven't been for years. So you're just going to give up on us? Tyler asked. Move across the country and pretend we don't exist? I'm not giving up on you, I said firmly. I'm giving up on trying. To force unhealthy relationships to become healthy through my own increased effort and decreased standards. Mom gathered her purse with sharp, angry movements. I think we've said everything that needs to be said. You've made your choice, and apparently nothing we can say will change your mind. You could try acknowledging that my choice is based on legitimate concerns rather than character flaws or mental instability, I suggested. Your concerns are legitimate, Emma said quickly, desperately. We hear you, we understand, and we want to change. Emma, 3 hours ago, you texted me asking if I could help you move furniture this weekend, I said, showing her the message on my phone. Even while planning this intervention about how you want to be more considerate of my time and energy, you were still treating me like your personal assistant. The text message sat between us like evidence in a courtroom, undeniable proof that their promises of change were meaningless without fundamental shifts in how they viewed our relationships. Tyler stood up, his frustration finally boiling over. Fine. You want to leave? Leave. But don't expect us to keep begging you to stay when you've already decided we're not worth your time. I never said you weren't worth my time, I replied calmly. I said I wasn't willing to continue relationships where my time was taken for granted and never reciprocated. They left shortly afterward, their intervention having failed to achieve its objective. Mom's goodbye was stiff and formal, Tyler's was angry and dismissive, and Emma's was tearful and desperate. But none of them left with any genuine understanding of why I was leaving or what would need to change for me to consider staying. After they'd gone, I sat in my quiet apartment surrounded by moving boxes and felt a profound sense of completion. The confrontation I'd been dreading had happened, and I'd emerged from it with my resolve stronger than ever. They'd offered to treat me marginally better in exchange for abandoning my own goals and remaining available for their convenience. They'd framed my documentation of their behavior as unhealthy obsessiveness rather than necessary self-protection. They'd positioned my departure as abandonment rather than self-preservation. Most tellingly, they'd made no effort to understand my perspective or examine their own behavior beyond admitting they could do better. They'd approached the conversation as a negotiation to prevent my departure, rather than an opportunity to repair damaged relationships. But I was past the point of hoping they would change. I'd discovered something more valuable than their belated appreciation, the knowledge that I deserved relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. Seattle represented more than a new job or a fresh start. It represented freedom from people who would never see me as anything more than a convenient resource, no matter how much evidence I provided of their exploitation. In 2 weeks, I will leave Chicago forever. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I was absolutely certain it was the right decision. The family that had forgotten I existed was about to learn what life looked like when I actually disappeared. This time, it would be permanent, strategic, and entirely on my terms. The moving truck pulled away from my Lincoln Park apartment on March 28th, taking with it the last physical traces of my Chicago life. I stood on the sidewalk in the crisp morning air, holding nothing but a suitcase and the keys to a rental car that would carry me to Seattle, and a future I'd built entirely on my own terms. My phone had been silent for 3 days. After their failed intervention, my family had apparently decided that if they couldn't change my mind, they would punish me with withdrawal of their attention. The irony was breathtaking. They were trying to hurt me by withholding the very thing I'd been seeking freedom from, their constant demands and expectations. The drive to Seattle took 4 days, and I used every mile to process the transformation I'd undergone since Christmas Eve. The woman who had sat quietly while her father joked about forgetting she existed was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and had the courage to pursue relationships that honored that worth. I'd left behind more than just a city. I'd left behind the version of myself that had mistaken being useful for being loved, that had confused being needed for being valued. The Sarah Mitchell driving toward Seattle knew the difference between people who appreciated her contributions and people who exploited her generosity. My new apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood was everything my Chicago place hadn't been. Chosen entirely for my own preferences, decorated according to my own taste, and free from the expectation that it would serve as a gathering place for people who took my hospitality for granted. Digital Solutions Inc.'s Seattle office occupied 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking Puget Sound, with views that reminded me daily that I'd made the right choice. My new team consisted of 12 brilliant developers who treated collaboration as a mutual exchange rather than a one-way extraction of expertise. Within my first week, I'd implemented project management systems that increased efficiency by 30%. Within my first month, I'd secured 2 major clients through presentations that showcased innovations my Chicago experience had made possible. By the end of my second month, I'd been asked to lead a company-wide initiative to expand our West Coast operations. The professional recognition was gratifying, but more meaningful was the way my Seattle colleagues interacted with me as a complete person rather than a convenient resource. When I offered help with their projects, they reciprocated with assistance on mine. When I shared expertise, they acknowledged my contributions and sought my input on future decisions. When I needed support, they provided it without making me feel like I was imposing. These were relationships based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's contributions. They were what I'd been trying to create with my family for 28 years, without realizing such relationships were possible. Jessica had become my primary source of information about the Mitchell family dynamics in my absence. Her reports arrived via text every few weeks, providing updates that confirmed everything I'd predicted about how they would handle my departure. The first crisis had occurred within 10 days of my departure. Tyler's computer crashed, taking with it files for a presentation he needed for work. In the past, he would have called me to diagnose the problem, research solutions, and coordinate repairs while he waited passively for his technology crisis to resolve itself. Instead, he'd been forced to contact technical support himself, pay for professional data recovery services, and learn basic backup procedures to prevent future disasters. The process had taken 3 days and cost him $400, but he'd managed it independently. He complained to everyone who would listen about how expensive and complicated it was, Jessica reported. But the interesting thing is that he figured it out. He actually handled the whole situation himself once he didn't have you to call. Emma's crisis had been more dramatic. She'd been accepted to graduate school, but needed to complete financial aid applications with tight deadlines. Historically, she would have brought me stacks of paperwork to decipher while she waited for me to translate bureaucratic language into actionable steps. Instead, she'd spent 2 weeks calling financial aid offices, researching scholarship opportunities, and filling out forms herself. The process had been stressful and time-consuming, but she'd successfully secured funding for her program. She kept saying how much easier it would have been if you were there to help, Jessica told me during one of our phone calls. But she also seemed kind of proud that she'd managed everything herself, like she'd discovered she was more capable than she thought. Dad's situation was perhaps the most revealing. His broken leg had healed completely, but he'd continued to claim he needed assistance with basic tasks that Dr. Hendricks had confirmed he could handle independently. When I wasn't available to coordinate his recovery, he'd been forced to acknowledge that his needs were much simpler than he'd pretended. He scheduled his own follow-up appointments, managed his own medication, and even figured out how to use the shower with his cast, Jessica reported with obvious amusement. Turns out he never actually needed medical expertise. He just wanted someone else to handle the logistics. But it was Mom's adaptation that provided the most insight into how my absence was affecting the family dynamics. Without me to coordinate holiday planning, gift shopping, and family gatherings, she'd been forced to recognize how much organizational labor I'd been providing invisibly. She tried to get Tyler and Emma to take over some of the responsibilities. "You used to handle," Jessica explained, "but they both said they were too busy or didn't know how to do it. So she ended up doing most of it herself." The reports painted a picture of a family that was slowly learning to function without their designated problem solver. But the lessons were coming at the cost of considerable inconvenience and expense. They were discovering their own capabilities, but they were also realizing how much they'd relied on my constant availability to avoid developing those capabilities themselves. More interesting than their practical adjustments were their emotional responses to my absence. According to Jessica, the family had gone through predictable stages of grief, though they'd never acknowledged that their loss was self-inflicted. The anger phase had lasted about 6 weeks, during which they'd characterized my departure as abandonment and selfishness. They'd told anyone who would listen that I'd overreacted to minor family disagreements and chosen career advancement over family loyalty. The bargaining phase had involved several attempts to lure me back to Chicago. Mom had called to tell me about family events I was missing, clearly hoping to trigger guilt or homesickness. Tyler had mentioned job opportunities in Chicago that might interest me. Emma had sent photos from family gatherings with captions about how much they missed me, but I'd maintained complete radio silence, and eventually they'd stopped trying to engage me directly. The depression phase, according to Jessica, had been the most difficult to watch. They'd begun to understand that my departure wasn't temporary or negotiable, and the reality of permanently losing their family organizer had hit them with unexpected force. "Your mom actually cried when she talked about missing you," Jessica told me during one of our spring conversations. "Not missing your help, but missing you as a person. I think she's finally starting to understand the difference." By summer, they'd apparently reached some version of acceptance, though it came with continued reluctance to examine their own role in driving me away. "They've started saying that you need space to grow and find yourself," Jessica reported with obvious eye-rolling. "They're framing your departure as a positive thing for your personal development, like they supported it all along." The revisionist history was predictable, but ultimately irrelevant. Whether they acknowledged their behavior or not, the consequences were the same. They'd lost access to someone who had made their lives significantly easier for nearly 3 decades. Meanwhile, my new life in Seattle continued to exceed every expectation I'd harbored when leaving Chicago. The professional opportunities were challenging and rewarding in equal measure. The city offered cultural experiences, outdoor activities, and social connections that enriched my life in ways I'd never experienced. Most importantly, I'd begun building relationships with people who valued reciprocity and mutual support as natural elements of friendship rather than impositions to be avoided. My neighbor, Patricia Wong, was a marine biologist who shared my love of hiking and introduced me to trail systems throughout the Pacific Northwest. When I offered to help her with a grant application that required technical writing skills, she reciprocated by teaching me photography techniques that improved my landscape pictures. My colleague Marcus Rivera became a close friend after we discovered shared interests in jazz music and international cuisine. When he needed project management advice for a freelance consulting contract, I provided guidance willingly. When I wanted recommendations for exploring Seattle's music scene, he spent an entire weekend introducing me to venues and performers I never would have discovered alone. These friendships developed organically around shared interests and mutual appreciation rather than one-sided utility. They were what I'd always hoped family relationships could become, and they proved that healthy connections were not only possible, but relatively simple to maintain when both parties valued equality and respect. 6 months after leaving Chicago, I received an unexpected email from Emma. The subject line read, "I understand now," and despite my resolution to maintain distance from family drama, curiosity compelled me to read the message. "Sarah," she began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand if you delete this without reading it. But I need to tell you that I've been thinking about everything you said before you left, and I finally understand what you were trying to explain to us. I started graduate school last month, and I've been struggling with the workload and the expectations. For the first few weeks, I kept wanting to call you for help organizing my schedule, editing my papers, and managing the stress. But you weren't there, obviously, and I had to figure things out myself. At first, I was angry about it. I felt like you'd abandoned me during a difficult transition. But as I started developing my own systems and solutions, I realized something important. I'm actually capable of handling these challenges independently. I'd just never been required to develop those skills because you were always available to solve problems for me. I've been thinking about all the times I called you for help with things I could have figured out myself if I'd put in the effort. All the times I assumed you'd take care of logistics or complications while I focused on more enjoyable activities. All the times I took your assistance for granted while never offering equivalent support in return. You were right about everything. Sarah, we did treat you like an unpaid assistant rather than a family member deserving of reciprocal care and consideration. We did exploit your generosity while convincing ourselves it was evidence of how much you loved us. And when you finally established boundaries, we tried to make you feel guilty for prioritizing your own well-being. I can't speak for Tyler or Mom and Dad, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for the specific incidents you documented, but for years of taking advantage of your kindness while never examining whether our relationships were fair or sustainable. I don't expect you to forgive me or to resume contact with our family. I understand that trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. But I wanted you to know that your decision to leave made me a better person. I've learned to solve my own problems, ask for help appropriately, and offer support to others without keeping score, but also without allowing myself to be exploited. I hope you're happy in Seattle. I hope you found people who appreciate you the way you deserve to be appreciated. And I hope that someday, if you ever decide our family is worth another chance, I'll be capable of the kind of relationship you were always trying to build with us. Love, Emma. The email sat in my inbox for 3 days before I crafted a response. Emma's message demonstrated genuine self-reflection and understanding in ways I'd never seen from any family member. But it also confirmed that the changes I'd hoped for had only become possible after I'd removed myself from the dysfunctional dynamic entirely. My response was brief, but sincere. Emma, thank you for your email and for taking the time to examine the patterns I tried to explain. I'm glad to hear that you're developing independence and self-reliance, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of how our relationships functioned in the past. I'm very happy in Seattle and wish you success in graduate school. Take care, Sarah. I didn't offer reconciliation or suggest future contact, but I also didn't close the door entirely. Emma's growth was real and meaningful, but it had only occurred after I'd established consequences for the family's behavior. Whether that growth would translate into sustainable changes remained to be seen. As autumn arrived in Seattle, painting the mountains in brilliant colors that Chicago's flat landscape could never match, I reflected on the year that had transformed my understanding of family, love, and personal worth. The Christmas Eve that had started this journey felt like it had happened to someone else. The woman who had sat quietly while her father joked about forgetting she existed had been replaced by someone who knew exactly what she deserved and had the courage to pursue it. I'd learned that love without respect isn't actually love, but manipulation disguised as affection. I'd discovered that being needed and being valued are entirely different experiences. I'd understood that family relationships should enhance your life rather than drain it, and that choosing yourself over people who exploit you isn't selfish but necessary for psychological survival. Most importantly, I'd proven to myself that it was possible to build a life based on mutual respect, genuine appreciation, and reciprocal care. The friends I'd made in Seattle, the colleagues who valued my contributions, and the opportunities I'd created through my own efforts had all confirmed that healthy relationships were not only possible, but actually the norm when you refused to accept less than you deserved. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the gift exchange that had started everything, I hosted a small dinner party in my Seattle apartment. Patricia brought wine and stories from her latest research expedition. Marcus contributed homemade tamales and a playlist of holiday jazz standards. 3 other friends from work arrived with gifts that reflected genuine knowledge of my interests and preferences. We exchanged presents that evening, and for the first time in my adult life, I received exactly as many gifts as I gave. The symmetry felt revolutionary after years of one-sided generosity that had been taken for granted rather than appreciated. As we sat around my dining table sharing food and laughter, I thought about my family in Chicago and wondered if they were gathering at Mom and Dad's house on Maple Street. Were they managing their own holiday logistics without me? Had they learned to appreciate each other's contributions? Did they ever think about the daughter and sister who had disappeared from their lives because she'd finally understood her own worth? The questions didn't carry the emotional weight they might have once held. My family's ability or inability to change was no longer my responsibility or concern. They would either learn to build healthier relationships with each other, or they would continue the patterns that had driven me away. Either way, their choices no longer affected my happiness or self-worth. I'd found my answer to the question that had haunted me since childhood, what it felt like to be truly valued rather than simply useful. The answer was better than I'd ever imagined. As the evening wound down and my friends prepared to leave, Patricia raised her wine glass in a toast. To Sarah, who taught us all that the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to demand the respect you deserve. The toast was met with enthusiastic agreement from everyone around the table, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine or the fireplace crackling in the corner of my living room. I'd spent 28 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of providing it. Now, I was surrounded by people who offered genuine affection freely, without conditions or expectations beyond basic human decency. The family that had forgotten I existed had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Some people will never see your worth, but that doesn't diminish your value. It simply means you need to find people who have better vision. As I cleaned up after my guests had gone home, I reflected on how different this Christmas Eve felt from the one that had changed everything. Last year, I'd driven home through snowy Chicago streets feeling hollow and forgotten. This year I was in my own home, chosen and decorated according to my own preferences, filled with the lingering warmth of genuine friendship and mutual appreciation. The transformation was complete. I'd become the person I'd always had the potential to be, but only after removing myself from people who had limited my growth through their selfish expectations and casual cruelty. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. "Merry Christmas, Sarah. Hope Seattle is treating you well. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. They're all managing fine without you, which kind of proves your point about how much they actually needed your help versus how much they just enjoyed having you handle everything. Take care." I smiled as I read her message, grateful for the one family member who had been willing to see the truth about our relationships and validate my decision to pursue something better. As I prepared for bed in my quiet apartment overlooking the Sound, I felt a profound sense of peace that had been building since the day I'd decided to value myself as much as I'd always valued others. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day in my new life, filled with opportunities I'd created and relationships I'd chosen based on mutual respect rather than obligation. It would be the first Christmas in 28 years where I wouldn't spend the day serving other people's needs while ignoring my own. The gift I'd given myself by leaving Chicago wasn't just professional success or geographic adventure. It was the knowledge that I deserved love that didn't come with conditions, appreciation that didn't require constant proof, and relationships that enhanced rather than diminished my sense of self-worth. I'd finally learned the difference between being forgotten and choosing to disappear. One was something that happened to you. The other was power you claimed for yourself. The Mitchell family had forgotten I existed, but Sarah Mitchell had remembered exactly who she was and what she deserved. And for the first time in her life, that was more than enough. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.